Hello, friends. Welcome back for another chapter of Ken Schoolin's book, The Adventures of Jonathan Gullible, a Free Market Odyssey. Tonight, I'll be reading from chapter 35, Merryberries. And like all the chapters, this one starts with a quote. It will be found an unjust and unwise jealousy to deprive a man of his natural liberty upon a supposition that he may abuse it. Oliver Cromwell. All right, chapter 35, Merryberries. As Jonathan wondered where to go next, a rotund, sloppily dressed woman approached him cautiously. The woman's greasy, unkempt hair repulsed him, and she smelled like a putrid swamp. Mises darted away. Psst! Do you want to feel good? Whispered the woman nervously. Jonathan recoiled in disgust. She repeated in a strained voice, Do you want to feel good? After the policeman's description of immorality, Jonathan felt unsure of what to say. However, he thought that this repulsive woman could not be trying to sell sexual favors, so Jonathan, being an honest, sensible chap, answered truthfully, Doesn't everyone want to feel good? Come with me, said the woman, gripping his arm firmly. She led him down an alley and through a dingy, darkened doorway. Jonathan remembered the robbery and tried to hang back, holding his breath to shield himself from her stench. Before he could protest, the woman closed the door behind him and locked it. She motioned to Jonathan to sit at the table. From her bag, she pulled out a small case of thick cigars. Selecting one, she bit the end, lit the other with a match, and drew a long, satisfying puff. Jonathan shifted uncomfortably in his seat and asked, What do you want? She exhaled a plume of smoke explosively and said gruffly, You want Merryberries? What are Merryberries? Asked Jonathan. The woman's eyes narrowed suspiciously. You don't know what Merryberries are? No, said Jonathan, starting to get up from his chair. And I really don't think I'm interested, thank you. The woman ordered him to sit down, and he reluctantly complied. After puffing on her cigar and scrutinizing him closely, she said, Say, you're not from around here, are you? Jonathan paused, worrying that she guessed he was a newcomer. But before he could reply, the woman yelled, False alarm! Come on out, Doobie! A hidden door suddenly opened behind a tall, narrow mirror, and a uniformed police officer came bounding through. How do you do? Said the policeman, thrusting his hand out for Jonathan to shake. I'm Doobie, and this is my partner, Mary Jane. Sorry to inconvenience you, but we're undercover agents rooting out the Merryberry trade. Turning to Mary Jane, he added, I'm starved. Let's make it up to this young fellow with a little refreshment. From the cupboards in the room, they began pulling boxes, packages, bottles, and jars of every shape and size. Food! Jonathan breathed a sigh of relief, and his mouth watered at the sight of the feast. The two began to help themselves to the goodies scattered on the table. There were pastries of all types, fresh bread, butter and jam, slices of cheese, chocolate confections, and other tasty delights. Doobie grabbed a hunk of biscuit and dabbed butter and jam thickly on top with his fingers. Dig in, young fella, he said through mouthfuls of food. He waved his hand over the table. No politicafes for the Merryberry squad, right, Mary Jane? She could only nod, her fat cheeks bulging from the chocolate sweet in her mouth. Jonathan took a slice of bread with jam and ate hungrily. Pausing to make conversation, he asked again, What are Merryberries? Mary Jane poured a cup of coffee and heaped 3 spoonfuls of sugar into it. As she stirred some thick cream into the cup, she replied, You really don't know? Well, Merryberries are an illegal fruit. If you had tried to buy Merryberries from me, then you would have gone to the zoo for 10 or 20 years. Jonathan's loud gulp could be heard across the room. He had narrowly escaped the zoo. Mary Jane and Doobie caught a look at his face for a moment and instantly burst out laughing. But what's so bad about Merryberries? Demanded Jonathan. Does it make people sick? Or violent? Worse than that, said Doobie as he used a sleeve to wipe the smears of jam and butter from his cheeks. Merryberries make people feel good. They just sit quietly and dream. Disgusting, added Mary Jane as she lit up a thick, long cigar and handed it to Doobie. Taking a buttery biscuit and spreading generous layers of cream cheese on top, she muttered, "It's an escape from reality." "Yeah," said Doobie, adjusting his gun belt more comfortably and mumbling through another mouthful of biscuit. Jonathan had never seen anyone cram food into his mouth so fast. Young people nowadays just don't take responsibility for their lives. So when they turn to Merryberries as an escape, we bring them back to reality. We arrest them and lock them behind bars. "Is that better for them?" asked Jonathan discreetly, offering Doobie a serviette. "Sure," responded Mary Jane. "Want a shot of whiskey, Doobie?" Doobie grinned and thrust a greasy glass toward her. She filled it to the brim with a brown fluid from an unlabeled jug. Returning to Jonathan's original question, she replied, "You see, Merryberries are addictive." "What do you mean?" "It means you always want to have more. You feel like you must have it to continue living." Jonathan considered this. "You mean like food?" he said, barely audible over the huge burp that exploded from Doobie. Doobie chuckled contentedly as he drowned his second shot of booze and puffed deeply on his cigar. No, Merryberries have no nutritional value and may even be unhealthy. Hand me the ashtray, will you, Mary Jane?" "And if Merryberries are unhealthy," said Mary Jane, as she stirred her coffee with a stick of candy, "then we'd all have to pay for the treatment of those sorry derelicts, no matter how foolish their behavior and habits. Uncontrolled Merryberry eaters would be a burden on all of us." Jonathan blurted out, "If people harm themselves, why should you pay for their folly?" "It's the only humane thing to do," said Doobie, now a bit tipsy. His hands were swinging and jabbing in the air with every thought that came to mind. "We solve human problems. The Lord's got to pay for a lot of problems, you know, like our salaries and the big zoos. And don't forget, last year the Council of Lords had to help the tobacco and sugar farmers get through a bad year. Got to feed the people, don't you know? Taxes solve these problems and plenty more. Taxes care for people who become ill. It's the only decent, civilized thing to do. Pass the whiskey, Mary Jane." Mary Jane passed him the jug and nodded in agreement. She lit a new cigar from her packet by holding it to the stub of her previous smoke. Doobie was on a roll. "Because we got to help everyone. We got to control what everyone does." "We?" questioned Jonathan. "Eek!" belched Doobie. "Excuse me." He took a pill bottle from his shirt pocket. "When I say we, I don't mean you and me personally. I mean that the Lords decide for us what is good behavior and who must pay for bad behavior. In fact, it's good behavior to pay for bad behavior. Does that make sense, Mary Jane? Anyway, the Lords don't make mistakes on these decisions like the rest of us would." Doobie stooped down from stopped to down a couple of little red pills. His words were beginning to slur. "Funny how I always say we when talking about them. Mary Jane, would you like a couple of these to calm your nerves?" "Thanks, but no thanks," she said graciously. She slipped a delicate metal box across to him, adding, "My pretty pink pacifiers work a lot faster. I can hardly start the day without my coffee and one of these. Here, try one if you like. It's the latest in prescribed chemistry." Jonathan reflected on the politicians he had met so far. Are the Lords wise enough to show people correct behavior? "Somebody has to," bellowed Doobie, as he wobbled slightly in his chair. He took another slug of whiskey to wash down a mouth filled with cakes and pink pills and glared at Jonathan. "If people don't behave correctly, we'll certainly teach the bums responsibility when they get to the zoo." Doobie began to plead with the others to join him in a round of drinks. "No, thank you," said Jonathan. "What do you mean by responsibility?" Mary Jane moved to pour a little whiskey into her coffee before adding still more sugar and cream. "I don't know how to... Well, Doobie, you explain it." Let me think." Doobie tilted his chair back and puffed on his cigar. He might have looked wise, except that he almost lost his balance. "Recovering," he said, "responsibility must be accepting the consequences of your own actions. Yes, that's it. It's the only way to grow, you know, to learn." The smoke around Doobie thickened as he puffed faster, trying to think hard about responsibility. No, interrupted Mary Jane. "That's too selfish. Responsibility is taking charge of others. You know, when we keep them from harm, when we protect them from themselves." Jonathan asked, "Which is more selfish, to take care of yourself or to take charge of others?" "There's only one way to figure this out," declared Doobie. He stood bolt upright from his chair, knocking it to the floor. Let's take him to the Grand Inquirer. If anyone can explain responsibility, he can. And that, my friends, is the end of chapter 35. Chapter 35, Merryberries. I have a feeling our friend Jonathan is in for some bad times here. That's probably the first chapter that I actually had to swallow a chuckle while I was reading, because the symbolism there is not really very far under the surface, if it's even under the surface. I hope you enjoyed that. It's definitely brought up some conversations that I've had recently and the relevance of those. Well, have a great day, and I will see you next time with the next chapter, chapter 36, The Grand Inquirer.